the end. All right, so ArrayList. Has anybody used ArrayList before? I think I asked last week. If you guys used ArrayList. ArrayList is similar to arrays, but they have a lot more functionality built in. So we have ArrayList, and the other thing we have been using before is just arrays. So today we're going to be using string array. So it's pretty simple. If you understand the concept of arrays, it's not that hard, but the extra functionality that comes with ArrayList, that's when it gets a little confusing. So we'll dive into that. So we're going to be using ArrayList today with strings. So with arrays, if you have arrays of string, you would declare it this way, right? So you have, let's say, names equals to name string, and you would have to define a size here, right? So you have to define a size, and then you cannot have more than 5 elements in this array. But ArrayList, all you need to do is you need to do ArrayList, and then you have to specify which data type. And it has to be an object data type. You cannot have primitive data type. So you have string right now, that is an object. If you wanted to do int, you cannot do int like this. You have to use an object integer. And same thing with long. You have to use an object long. And anything that you're trying to use, you have to use an object. You can't use Boolean primitive data type. You have to use a Boolean object. So string itself is an object, so we can use that as it is. And we can name this names list equals to new array list, and you don't have to specify a size. As soon as you declare it, it is declared. It is declared to be 1, and as soon as you start, I guess as soon as you declare it, the size is set to 0. As soon as you start adding it, it increases the size. Yeah, so because of the functionality and the functions they come with, ArrayList, sometimes it is easier, yes. All right, so now if you wanted to add something to arrays, you would do names, and you would do the index equals 2, and let's do my name, something like this, right? But if you're using ArrayList, you would do the instance name, and there are a bunch of built-in methods. So you have add method, and you just add. So now before the size was 0, and now the size becomes 1. So if you depends on what you want to use. If you know the specific size of how big your data is going to be, you may want to use arrays. But what happens in the array list, I think next class or maybe in the data structure class, you'll be able to design this on your own. So you'll be able to create an array list data structure, and you'll see what happens in the background. For array list, you actually have to have this import. It was automatically imported for me. It comes from the util library, and if it's not already imported, this is an outside import you have to do for ArrayList. So for my work, we're not allowed to use any of the imports. So any outside code, anything that's not coming with Java or C# or any of the languages that we use, we actually have to create it. So we would have to create ArrayList data structure ourselves, and then we'll be able to use it. So it just depends on where you work. You may not be able to use anything like that. So it does not move anything. So this actually replaces whatever is in index 5 and overwrites it with Michael. So if you run it now, at index 3 we had Amber, and that was replaced by Michael. It does not make a space for it to be added, it just replaces it. So let me go through the list. So there's also a function called contains. So we do names list dot contains, and this is where it's kind of like search. If you're looking for an object that exists inside a list, array list, you would do a list name list that contains Zach. It's going to go search for it, and I think it's going to return true or false, or maybe the index. There are a lot of built-in functions, so I have the list of the functions pulled up here. The last thing I want to go over right now is add all, and what that's going to do is, let's say you have this list right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another array list of string type, call that new list equals to array list. Here I'm going to add more names. So we have two lists. There's a function. If you wanted to combine both of those two lists, what you can do is you can do whichever you want to combine the two. You want to use that list dot add all, and you just pass in the new list. What that's going to do is going to add that list at the end of the old list right here. It's going to take this list and add it all the way at the end. Run it, and we're printing name list, added that new list. So if you wanted to add it somewhere in the middle, like index 2, you can pass in the index, and it'll take that whole list and add it at index 2. So there are two functions, add all. One takes the index, one does not, so it added it right there. So let's start with something simple. So we've been working with main functions. I'm going to do this. Let's say you wanted to print the whole array list. I know we have a function called toString. We can print it that way, but if you wanted to print, like write a function that does that, how can we replicate that function? So it's going to be public. So how would we start writing the function? This is where you would need to guide me. We're trying to print array list. How would we do that? So instead of doing something like this, we're going to do print, and we're going to do names list. And since we don't have a return type, we just need to, nothing would print because the function is empty, nothing happens. Here we're calling the function, we're passing it in, that array list comes in here, but nothing happens here. So how would we print it out? So remember, we're trying to print it manually. So this would be a similar way of printing. How would you print arrays? Use a loop to access each index. Yes, so we can do for I int I equals 2, 0. Then we have a condition, and then we have increment. What would that be? What the condition would be here? So we have a starting point right here, starting at index 0. Then we need an ending point, right? So that ending point would be sort of a condition, and we're incrementing by 1. How far do we want to go up until? I is less than names dot length. So I think they have a function called size instead of length. So in this, where you would use size. And how would you print it out? And how would you print it out? Anybody? So what happens inside the for loop? It is iterating through the list. Yes. So S out. So system that out that print ln or print, I guess, in this case, and you do names and you do I like this. Would this work? So how do you access something from the list using the index? You need to use square brackets instead. Remember, the square brackets are only for arrays. We are trying to print array list get. So we use get method. So we do dot get and then pass in the index. So we have instead of length function, we have a size function, and instead of brackets, we use get. So same concept, everything is the same, but the syntax of writing it is a little different. So all in programming, all you need to know is something similar to that exists. You can always look it up what that's going to be. Like I actually forgot what that is called size. I was trying to type in length, right? But I knew there's something like that existed, and as soon as the length didn't exist, I was like, oh, it's got to be the size. So get is the same thing as using brackets and passing in the index. So if you run it now, you'll get all the numbers squished together. So I'm gonna all the names squished together, and actually gonna all the elements are printed as such. And if you wanted to format it, obviously you can format it, but for right now I'm just gonna leave it as is. And if you the get function actually returns the element, and it takes in the parameter would be the index. Whatever index you pass in, it returns the element. So if it's printing on a new line, maybe you have a print ln here. Print ln is just printing new line, and I actually have a print, only print. Make sure you choose that, take out the ln. So if I add ln, that'll be the new line. So let's look at the names. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a new name to the list. New list dot add James. And I'm going to run the program, and that James will be right after. So we have John, and then we have James. So let's write a function. So write a function that deletes all the names from array list that starts with letter. So write a function that deletes all the names from array list that starts with letter J. So add one more. So we have new list. What's another name that starts with J? We have at least 3 to work with. Write a function that deletes all the names from array list that starts with letter J. How would we do something like that? Same for loop, but instead of get it is a remove. Yeah, so similar loop right here. So we do actually have to go through the array, right? And to go through the array, we need to use a for loop. And before that, before we get into the for loop, we need to write a function. So it's going to be static function, and not going to return anything. Remove J. We'll just call it remove J, and we're going to take array list of string type, and we can call that. So similar loop. We need some kind of copy this right here and remove this statement. So we need a loop that starts at index 0 and goes through the whole array. So we know this loop does that. What needs to happen inside the for loop to be able to see if the name starts with an if statement? So if, what an if statement? How do we write that if statement? And what are we comparing? Char index of, so we can do, so I think there is a built-in function for string. Remember, this is a string data type. And it does starts with function, and we can use that. So we can do something names dot get. First, we need to get that element that starts with, and we know we're looking for letter J, and that would be something like that. So char dot index of. I think that might work too, but starts with a little simpler. Right. So what happens inside this if statement? Name dot remove. So I'm sorry, names dot remove, and you pass in the object. And what is that object? So the remove function actually takes an object. So is there a function that takes in an index? Right? The remove function takes in an index and a value. So if you just pass in I, that would work too. And this also works. So remove, and if you type in, let's say that, this also works. So either way would work. So we have the index, so we can just use that index to remove it. So the list of all these functions, I'll actually post it on Canvas if it's not already posted, and you'll be able to go through it and see. So would this work? So if this is a little confusing, you can actually simplify that. You can do string name equals 2, and you names get, and instead of writing it this way, you can do name. That is the exact same thing. Remember, this is name and this is names. Names is the list and name is the one object. All right, is that it? Do we need to do anything else? All right, so we have John. Oh, wait, I actually didn't call the function. So when we call the function, remove J, and we will pass in the same list, and we will print a list again. So I'm printing the list before and after, and in the middle I'm calling. Does anybody know what's going on? So we made a mistake in one of the functions, but what is that mistake? So why do we get like this whole big list? When we use print right here, remember the cursor stayed on the same line. So when we call the function here, we never moved the cursor to the next line. And we call the function again, it printed on the same line. So if we just add system.out.println, this is going to force the cursor to be on the next line when we start printing this. So as soon as we print this, we move the cursor to the next line, and then when we call the function again, it prints on that next line. We'll run it again. So now 2 elements were deleted. John was deleted, starts with J, and James was deleted, starts with J. But Jerry is still there. Why is that? Why is Jerry still there? Names two starts with Jerry. It does not start with John. So even if you just remove this and use names instead of having 2 lists, you're just gonna have, so the index changes. So let's run it. So now remember, now we only have 1 list, right? So we have this and all of this combined in 1 list. That's what we've been working with. And the index changes. What do you mean the index changes? So somebody said array list assignment, there is no submission. Let me go back. Array list assignment. Going back to this, I mean, when we delete J word, the list shifts to take its replace. Let's say index of J word and version is 5 will take its place and so on. Yes, I think that is exactly what is happening. So let me try to draw it out. So now we have the list. So this, let's say we're this list right here. So we have, once we get to this John right here, right? Once we get to this John, what's happening is deleting this John and moving everything over, right? It's moving everything over by 1 because you can't have empty space in the middle. So now the index for Jerry is the same as what it was at John. But when we remove John, we increase the index. So Jerry took John's place, but now we're looking at Todd. Is that gonna make sense? Because we skipped that index. Yeah. So let me do this on a smaller level so you'll be able to see. So we can fix this by decrementing 1. And when would we actually decrement I? Right after it removes it. Yes. So as soon as we remove something, we want to check that value again. So we want to do I minus here. So that would go back and actually check the index one more time, a value at that index. So we are actually working with a lot of numbers. So move this to the front. So now this is what our list looks like. So John, Jerry, and James, right? So if you run it, John and Jerry. So now what's happening is if you run the function, if you don't have this right here, so if you don't have this, I'm going to take this out for a moment. If you don't have this, what's happening is Jerry is still there. Why is Jerry there? So what's happening is you start at index 0, right here. You'd look at this, you go in at line 54, or line 55, you check starts with J. Yes, it starts with J. Remove it. All right, that's great. Now everything shifts over by 1. As soon as you removed it, everything shifts over by 1. So now the index 0 is Jerry. Remember, I was index 0 when we removed. As soon as we remove it, it goes and increments I by 1. So now I is 1. But everything has been shifted over. Jerry is at index 0 now, but we're index 1. So now we look at index 1, which is index 1 is Todd. We started Todd, and we just skipped Jerry altogether. But as soon as we remove it, if we do I minus, what that's going to do is going to take this I, it's going to decrement it first, it's going to go to -1, and then it's going to go back. So it's going to -1 on line 57, and then it's going to increment back to 0. Same thing, and it only decrements as soon as we find something, as soon as we remove it. As soon as we remove it, we need to check that index position one more time, because everything is shifting over by 1. I think this would work. Let's test it out. All right, so everything from the list that starts with J has been removed. So it is 157.